MBS KFEL Denver Radio. Friday, April 3rd, 7:15 to 7:30 Mountain West Time. This is Passover. Good evening. The other day, the Nazi radio told American listeners, I quote, "America's entrance into the war will cost her 10 million men." Think of it, 10 million of the finest and best. The fingers pointing at Roosevelt, Stimson, and Knox. If they amounted to anything, they would have grossly underestimated the strength of your enemy. What did they tell you? In a month we will be in Tokyo, unquote. Those dopesters in Berlin must think American possess no memory at all, because neither President Roosevelt nor any other government spokesman in Washington has, as far as I can remember, ever made a statement or even an implication of that nature. But that doesn't concern Nazi liars. All they are after is to mix up and confuse the American public by driving home the horrifying idea that 10 million of the best and finest Americans will be sacrificed under an inept and bungling leadership. But they cannot drive that idea home. American power of reasoning and America's quick-witted intelligence snap right back at Dr. Goebbels. If the war would cost us 10 million men, it would cost Hitler at least 20 million. And Hitler hasn't got them. Hitler may have 10 million men under arms all told, and the first line fighting portion of that number is now solidly engaged with the Red Army. So if America would bring up 10 million of her own, where would that put Mr. Hitler? The same Nazi speaker flung this at us. I quote again, "An alien mob led by Jews supported by Roosevelt have the power in Washington. If American listeners would take my advice, it would not take them long to get rid of these international insects," unquote. Now, calling Jews insects. Now, American listeners just laugh at that advice, Mr. Clubfoot of the Wilhelmstrasse. But let's pause a little and just the same at this day in, day out repeated Nazi charge that all the nations opposing Hitler's are merely victims of an international conspiracy of Jewish financiers. Look at Jekyll Island and see how many were Jewish. It's not very many. Just who are the international conspirators who threaten all peaceful people all over the globe? And who are the men who have successfully tried by way of patents and otherwise to tie up some of the biggest manufacturers and corporations in this country? Who are the conspirators who established 5 giant spy rings all throughout the Western Hemisphere below the Rio Grande? And who are the international gangsters who have tried and often succeeded in planting one of their henchmen in every nook and cranny of nearly all peaceful nations in order to rob them of every shred of peace and prosperity? Who are the international financiers who spent money like drunken sailors in Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City, here in this country, in Tokyo, Shanghai, in Ankara, and all over the Near East? And in the Balkan capitals, and finally in Paris, London, Brussels, Den Haag, Oslo, and not to speak of Cape Town and other African hotbeds of the Fifth Calamity, sabotage, and Quisling. The correct answers to these questions can be found in the files of the Institute of Für des Auslands Deutschtum in Stuttgart, Germany. Not by the wildest stretch of imagination has any group of men at any time in history attempted and perpetrated such a worldwide conspiration as have the hirelings of that power, of that former slum dweller, the world's best authority ever, that is indecent, treacherous, and criminal, Herr Adolf Hitler of Braunau, Austria. It started when they dug up Zeus's throne and brought it to Berlin in the 1900s, before World War I. I don't know if Siegfried knew that. But he lived through everything that happened and saw how these people had all the money and did what they did to bring in Hitler. After the last war of a lot of so-called revelations accused an international ring of munition makers in having started that war and kept it going, since 1919, Hitler has been trying to pin the same charge on the so-called international Jewish bankers. But even if we would accept these allegations at face value, even if we accepted everything that has been said or written in this respect as gospel truth, which is most decidedly not, even in the case that these international munition makers and Jewish bankers would shrink to the state of infinitesimal pikers, if compared to Hitler's organization of international killers, cutthroats, blackmailers, saboteurs, fifth columnists, crookies, financiers, diplomats with false bottoms. Maybe that was part of the reason why a British trader in Berlin, Herr Haha, defended the Fuhrer's inability of creating a sensational victory news by emphasizing that man's silent, scientifically plotting way. Quite so. Gangsters have to work in darkness and obscurity. But Haha's prime reason was his and Dr. Goebbels' uneasiness over the sore fact that Hitler's hordes achieved no important success since the tide turned in Russia's last fall. How much that fact bears down on the Nazi morale and propaganda cropped out in a German-language broadcast to East Asia. While talking about the alleged successes of the Nazi night fighter planes, the speaker asserted that these night fighters will be the great help when the year of decision 1944 comes around. Really? How'd they know? D-Day. That's when my grandpa stepped in. I'm doing this for him. Grandpa Bud, wherever you are, miss you. Shall we take this as an admission that Hitler now agrees with President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill that 1944 will bring the decision? This is on Passover in 1942. How'd they know? How did everybody know in 1944 that's when it was going to happen? If so, then Hitler must have given up hope to defeat the United Nations during the time they need to build up their full fighting strength. From this, it would follow that he merely hopes for survival and no longer for victory, because if he cannot defeat the Allies now while they are still relatively weak, victory cannot be completely out of reach. Victory will be completely out of his reach by 1944 when they have gained their full fighting strength. D-Day. So they're all talking about D-Day 2 years before it happened. This put Mr. Boss, the Nazi field Indian nationalist leader, on the rather pathetic side when he appealed to his countrymen over the Berlin shortwave radio. I quote, "Every Indian who accepts Cripe's offer is a traitor to Indian. Only the Axis offers real freedom," unquote. And the Axis told the Indians they're Aryans and the Japs they're Aryans, and named Iran Aryan. Aryan means Iran. Should the Axis lose, Mr. Bose will be a man without a country and a refugee from the wrath and the justice of the Indian people, whom he is now betraying in the most shameless fashion. I'm not against any person unless they believe their race is better than another one enough to exterminate. God is the only one in charge of that. The only time I ever saw it was okay was in the Old Testament when King David and Joshua did what they had to do to clear the country. So far, I have not seen God telling Hitler to do what he had to do. Never saw it, never understood it. He did it, and a remnant survived, and one of those remnants is here. Picking up the sword of Siegfried and telling the world on his Passover message in 1942 what's the truth and what's going on. It would not be too far-fetched to assume that he might have been a companion of Calamity Jane Anderson when she filled up on her champagne and delicious sweetmeats in Berlin nightclub, whereupon she proceeded merely to tell the whole story over the air as her evidence that things were just fine and dandy in Berlin. When Goebbels heard the story in German from an American shortwave stations, he fired her so quick that I've never again heard her quavering voice since then. I've never heard her quavering voice since then. No doubt, Goebbels has serious reasons not to let the German public in on the nightlife of his star casters. The Russian radio told a long story why the Hitlerites fear the German people more than ever at this particular moment. In brief, Moscow said this: Why did Goebbels threaten polite people in Germany with the gallows? He had to do it because the new food rations mean a very substantial reduction. Little as we know about the actual state of affairs in Germany, It is sufficient that discontentment is widespread with women and demonstrating before Hitler's headquarters and crying and put an end to this damnable war. The German Goebbels is going to hang, and those with empty and not with full stomachs. He said he often sees men who look quite worn out. It is these worn out working men whom Goebbels must fear. Moscow radio said a mouthful, but in another broadcast it said even more when it revealed that the German soldiers' term for loot and stealing is the word organizing. What? Moscow radio said a mouthful, but in another broadcast it said even more when it revealed that the German soldiers' term for loot and stealing is the word organizing. That term was created in the First World War, and everybody in every class in Germany, father, mother, son, and daughter, had to steal and commit outrageous fraud simply to keep the body and soul together, because they were starving. Neither the soldiers nor the people at home would normally have done such things. After all, they used to be law-abiding citizens. But hunger is the worst master and the greatest teacher. And they stole what they couldn't get by legal means. Naturally, they dreaded to call what they did by its right name, and so whenever a soldier or a civilian made a good haul and got clean away with it, his admiring compatriots would say it was well organized. It was one of those escapes from the hard, brutal facts of war with an innocent word the people tried to cover up before themselves and before everybody else that their government had finally driven them to commit shameful crimes. The word was organizing, the date 1917. It was a symbol of the beginning of the end of Germany. For Germany. And that is my analysis of propaganda for the present. The shortwave stations which I have referenced were Berlin DJD, DJQ, DXJ, and Moscow RV-11 and RV-15. Free copies of this or any other talk in the series, including my biography, can now be had from the station to which you are listening. And now, from the roof of America at the foot of Long's Peak, I wish you a pleasant and good evening.